Welcome once again to Let's Rethink, and we've got Richard Lucas with us, and Richard is from the Scottish Family Party. Now, it's fairly new, isn't it, Richard?
We are indeed. We've been going just about 3 years now, but we started from absolutely nothing 3 years ago. No staff, no money, just a bit of enthusiasm and an idea, and we've grown from there.
Now you have no money but some staff, I understand.
I'm working on the family party full time, unpaid at the moment. But we've grown in all directions. It's very encouraging.
Well, Scotland actually has been a ground for various parties, a lot of them Christian parties, and they've not done really well. Now, are you a Christian party or just a conservative?
We're definitely not a Christian party. That's a really interesting question. A lot of the people involved in the family party are Christians. I would say probably even more than half. I would possibly even say that. But we're definitely not a Christian party because there's a lot of other people who agree with the values that we promote, be they Christians, people of other faiths, particularly Muslims, and also there's lots of atheists as well. They can see what's going wrong with society. They can see that the values are getting all muddled up. And they can see that the traditional values, as they might call them, are what's needed. So we're trying to build the broadest possible coalition of people who share these socially conservative values. And if we put the Christian label on it, then we're repelling a fair number of those. The other thing is, it depends what your vision is for politics. I mean, do we really want politics to be the Christian party versus the Muslim party versus the atheist party? I think if you look at countries that end up with politics like that, it doesn't work out too well. So we want to unite around policies rather than identity.
Yeah, it is. It's very incendiary indeed. How did you get into politics yourself?
Well, it's quite a long story. I've always been quite interested in politics. I was a member of the Conservative Party years and years ago, and I was involved in a lot of debating, speaking, writing from a Christian perspective. And it was particularly some moral, political issues. A lot of people were saying to me, look, you should go into politics. And I started feeling, this is my calling. This is what I should do. So I thought, right, how do you do it? So I thought, right, I could join the Conservative Party, try and get selected as a candidate, maybe get elected and, have some influence that way. Then I looked at the track record of the Conservative Party and I thought there's just no way, even if by some administrative error I managed to get through their selection process. In the election campaign, someone will find something I've said or written somewhere that they don't like. There'll be a bit of controversy. And the track record of the Conservative Party is they just chop candidates immediately when that happens. They just won't put up with it. So I thought there's no point investing years in the Conservative Party, delivering leaflets, getting to know everyone, in the hope that maybe I could be a candidate one day, maybe get elected. It was just never going to happen because I'm on the record of saying too many sensible things already. I mean, some people, when they try and become a Conservative candidate, they think, right, my mission now is to be bland and boring and to not say anything until I get elected. In fact, forevermore, probably. It's already too late for me. I've said lots of things. It's all on record. So I thought, right, Conservatives, no hoper. Right, what's the next option? We're talking back in like 2013 now. So I thought maybe UKIP. UKIP say they're the antidote to political correctness. Maybe at the very least, I could join UKIP. I was quite keen on leaving the EU. Wasn't top of my priorities, but I thought, right, I'll give UKIP a try. So I joined UKIP and I gave a speech to the Edinburgh branch about freedom of speech. And David Coburn, the leader of UKIP in Scotland at the time, who was gay, his partner was there. And I talked about the way people have lost their jobs, whatever, for opposing same-sex marriage. At the end of my speech, David Coburn's partner sort of went hysterical. And they did everything short of kick me out of UKIP for it. I'd like disciplinary measures, reported to headquarters, tried to stop me being a candidate. So eventually I thought, even in UKIP, they won't accept someone with traditional Christian values in UKIP in Scotland. So I thought, right, that's the end of the road there. So then myself and another 2 or 3 people, we thought, what's the way forward? So we decided a new party was the way. I've talked about why I don't think a Christian party is the way to go, even though I've got a lot of respect for people who've been involved in Christian parties and I agree with a lot of their policies. But we thought we need something new. And Scotland gives a unique opportunity with our weird electoral system. It's like Wales and the London Assembly. It gives small parties a chance. you can get someone elected with, say, 5 or 6% of the vote. So we thought, if we gear our philosophy of our party to the Scottish electoral system, let's see if we can get some people in the Parliament. But would absolutely revolutionise it, because you can watch the Parliament for hours on end, and you won't hear anyone say anything other than the standard line. We just want to get, even if it's just a couple in, first of all, we think it would break the mould and would open up debate and would be revolutionary.
Well, I mean, it's so divisive, Scotland. You've had all the extremes there, haven't you? And you've had some internal problems. I mean, have the Scots got the same heart for the English as they've always had? Or is it got to that stage now, and it has in parts of Wales, dare I mention, that the English aren't welcome?
There's hostility. When I first came to Scotland, 25 years ago, when I would be amazed, you like meet someone, really good friend, and then the World Cup comes along, and you end up watching a football game, and they're cheering like anything for the other team. And I remember trying to explain to people, I said, do you realise that English people support Scotland in these events? And they wouldn't believe me. They just wouldn't take that on board. So I think it's a very significant factor in a lot of people's thinking in Scotland. I wouldn't say it's a majority at all. I mean, I've had a great time living in Scotland, and occasionally you'll get someone who'll say, go home. You're English. What are you doing leading a political party in Scotland? You get that occasionally, but I think most people are beyond that. Having said that, I think it is a substantial element of the SNP's appeal. Is this sort of latent anti-English feeling? And I think they know they're appealing to it. They don't appeal to it explicitly, but I think they know that they are.
Yeah. That's fascinating because the go home thing. As a white English person, if you said to a black, I don't know, West Indian, go home, that's hate speech. You'd be in court. Yeah.
We had that recently. I mean, they've had all the Black Lives Matter discussions in Scotland. And our Justice Secretary, Humza Yousaf, is a Pakistani Muslim. Well, he calls himself a Muslim. He doesn't actually believe Muslim values. He stood up in the Parliament and said, sometimes people still say to me to go home. And then there's other MSPs standing up saying, I can't even imagine how that must feel. So I say, well, I can, because it happens reasonably often. With that, though, I mean, how big a deal is it? I mean, whether someone calls you all other names under the sun, or whether they say go home, I mean, I'm just not particularly bothered by it. You just ignore it and get on with what you're doing.
Indeed. I mean, in where we work mainly, which is in Portugal, where we are now, and Spain, often more frequently, I mean, the expat Brit is called a giri, which is not very attractive saying in Spanish, but we put up with it. We accept it. I suppose it's a bit stronger than calling an American a Yank. That goes back, doesn't it? But I mean, it's not hate speech, but it would be construed that way in Britain. What's happened?
I think it was bad enough already. I think the current Black Lives Matter movement has pushed it. I think they've gained so much ground, and it's not going to be retaken. The boundaries moved a long way. I think in schools, for example, in the new term in Scotland, when the kids are back in school, if they actually make it into school, I mean, there's already hardly any room on the walls because of all the LGBT posters, but they're going to have to take a few of them down to fit in the Black Lives Matter posters. Sure. I mean, they're already saying the Parliament, we need to get this into schools more. We need to make an impact with the young people. But it's all going to be, as I'm sure it's all going to be completely counterproductive. Race relations in Britain, and in Scotland in particular, are great. It's virtually unknown, I would say, in any sort of semi-respectable circles. They come across any real racism. There's always going to be the handful of people who've probably got other issues in their life as well. But it's creating a problem out of very little, I think.
Yeah, well, it's constructive, this, isn't it? I mean, who is creating it? Is it the Marxists? Is it the cultural Marxists that we hear a bit more about these days?
Yeah, I think it's a political movement. I mean, in Britain, probably you'll get someone who will be out on the streets with Extinction Rebellion placard one week. The next week they'll be out with Black Lives Matter. The next week they'll be out in the Pride March. Then there'll be the Me Too movement or whatever's coming along. So it's the same people in all of them, and they've got their range of issues. And the media is so compliant. So if the sort of progressive left decide we're going to have climate change month, so we'll march around the streets, there'll be a bit of a punch up and break a few windows, then that will be the media narrative for a whole month. I mean, now we're having the Black Lives Matter one. It's like they've just got total control of the media agenda and the political agenda as well, and the companies as well, jumping on the bandwagon.
Yeah. I mean, you have mentioned this in the past, actually, haven't you? That in Japan, where the education system is practically everything, there's still the kids can be caught out cleaning the classroom floor. But here in Great Britain, especially Scotland, it's all what are my rights, not the responsibility bit.
Oh, that's a massive issue. It came to the fore during the lockdown, because all the exams were cancelled, the same as in England. But the attitude straight away wasn't, right, okay, we've really got a bit of a challenge here, haven't we? So let's see, you need to really do your best. We've got challenges, but we can overcome them together. There's lots of help available, but let's see what we can do. Almost immediately, it's, your well-being is the first priority. Your mental health. Are you sure you're happy? If you feel like the work's a bit much for you, then don't worry. It's always leaning on that side. And within the schools, I mean, the schools are like therapy centers. So the poor kids are forever being sat down in groups. So, tell us about how you're feeling today. How are you coping? They have this thing called Shinari, where they check their well-being. So it's safe, safe, active, respected, responsible, nurtured, included, healthy. H for healthy. Sorry, I got in the wrong order. And they're forever checking up with the kids. So are you feeling included today? And the kid might say, well, I didn't really feel included in the game in the playground. Oh, well, what can we do? Would you like some counseling? Would you like us to have a special session to talk you through? So there's this obsession with some mental health and well-being and emotions. So the poor kids are forever being sat down in groups, and they're saying, are you feeling included today? Are you feeling nurtured? I mean, imagine like in a bunch of young boys and saying, in your group, discuss how it feels to be included and nurtured. I mean, it's torture for the poor kids. And it encourages them to see themselves as really vulnerable and delicate and just expecting to need professional support from the adults just to get through an ordinary day in primary school. But there's a great story I heard of a school that had a worry box. And the idea was that the children had to write down their worries and put them in the worry box. One day, a young girl went home and she said to mum and dad, she said, I'm really worried. Teacher wants us to put something in the worry box. I can't think of anything. Can you help me to come up with something to be worried about? And that's what it's like. So it's a balance issue. Obviously, you need this sort of caring, nurturing approach, but it's totally out of balance. And the idea of actually challenging and pushing someone and saying, yeah, come on, you can do it. Just get on with this. Come on. People would think, oh, that was a bit cruel. We need to send you on a new course in it. But it's totally out of balance.
Well, are you in favour of the boot camp?
In what way? National service?
Well, yes, let's call it that.
We've talked about that as a policy sometimes. There are people who still commend it. I think some sort of youth program at some stage of their later educational career is well worth considering.
And therefore, Sergeant Major will become mum and dad, will he?
Well, that's often the way that the school just passes over discipline often to parents, because the schools can't enforce discipline themselves. I mean, their idea in Scotland, you might find this difficult to believe, but this is true. Their idea is that you don't need to punish kids. Punishing is counterproductive. It just makes the problems worse, creates resentment. So punishment is completely unnecessary. So what you should do instead is have what they call restorative conversations, where you sit down with a group of pupils, or sit down, one-to-one with the pupil who's just sworn at the teacher or whatever, and you sort of try and make friends again. Help them to realize how much that upset you. And the idea is once they realize the negative effects of their behavior, then the job's done. There's no need for punishment. Their natural goodness bubbles up to the surface and they behave impeccably from then on. So humanist utopian nonsense. And the best example of that was a teacher in Fife was stabbed in the neck by a 16-year-old boy with a pencil. So this pencil had to be extracted from a neck. It was reported in the newspaper, and one of the leading unions, teaching unions in Scotland, one of their representatives commented on it. And he said, when there's a violent attack on a teacher like this, what needs to happen is the teacher and the pupil need to sit down in order to restore the relationship.
Well, it's madness, isn't it? It's dystopia. It is not utopia. And this is obviously on steroids in Scotland, because you hear stories from the rest of the United Kingdom, but not that far-fetched. But some people may think that is not far-fetched, and it's the normality. Is this the new normal that we're going to face after COVID?
Well, it's bizarre. This punishment thing, I phoned up a Radio Scotland phone-in a couple of months ago, and they were talking about all this sort of nonsense. And I phoned up and said, actually, I still think there's a place for punishment. Sometimes that's appropriate. People have got a natural sense of justice. They think wrongdoing deserves punishment. So I think sometimes children should be punished. And the two experts they've got there on their panel on Radio Scotland, both of them said, we're horrified that anyone still believes this in the 21st century. We're appalled to hear these archaic views are still held by people. But that's Scotland. You just say what you assume most people agree with, and you end up feeling like you're some sort of wild fringe extremist for saying it.
Well, this is important, because this is the BBC mantra, certainly all over the United Kingdom, that is presented, because it's part of the brainwashing, dare one say, that we're undergoing at the moment, and nowhere stronger than in our schools and universities. But how do you bring that back to normality?
The BBC, I think, is a massive, massive problem. You just look at their website virtually every day. There'll be a negative story about Trump. There'll be a negative one about Bolsonaro in Brazil if they get half a chance. Positive stories about whatever's on their agenda at the moment. I mean, it's beyond the pale. But it's worse than just the BBC, because in order to broadcast in Britain, you have to be neutral. I'm sure you know, in order to have a license to be a TV station, you have to be politically neutral. So all the other TV companies, they think, oh, all right, what does politically neutral mean? That must mean be like the BBC. So the BBC doesn't just present its own biased message, it also pulls the rest of the broadcast media in Britain in line with it. So it's effectively skewing the whole of the media as far as most people are concerned. And it's a huge, huge problem. Our policy is to scrap the license fee. So pay for the BBC if you want it. If you don't want it, you can pay for something else and watch that instead. It's
certainly a unique institution in the world, and a lot of people are arriving at that view quite independently of politics. Now, what's your real job apart from politics?
I haven't got a real job at the moment. I was teaching until 2 years ago, teaching maths in a boarding school. So I've taught in independent schools. I've been a housemaster at one point as well. But I got to the point where I wanted to focus exclusively on the family party to try and get it off the ground and get it moving. So the first year of the family party, I was still teaching. But for the last 2 years, I've been working on it full time. Having said that, I'm currently under investigation by the General Teaching Council for Scotland for saying that children need a mum and a dad ideally. And that case is going to come to a hearing. There'll be a decision on that hopefully within the next few months. I'm expecting them to strike me off, but we'll see how it goes.
That's tragic, because that happens quite well in the more progressive, inverted commas, countries in the world. A lot in Canada, a lot in Britain, and getting more and more in the US. They've taken over. Richard, have they won?
I mean, the thing in Scotland is so many of these things that you and I would think are controversial issues, they don't think they're controversial. They think their view is the right view, and the only other view is like evil Nazis or whatever. And part of the reason they think that is if you listen in the Scottish Parliament, you don't hear this range of views. So if you're, say, running the education system, if you're representing the whole spectrum of views in the Scottish Parliament, you might feel like, oh, that's okay, because that is the spectrum of views in Scotland. But it isn't. Because these views are not represented in the Parliament, all these other organisations can get away with saying, well, you know, that this is the acceptable range. And it's within the whole education system, but it's everywhere as well. It's right. I mean, even to be a doctor in Scotland, as I understand it, the sort of declaration you have to sign up to includes a commitment to social justice. We know what that means. That's sort of left-wing progressive. I do know the same. To be a teacher in Scotland, you have to adhere to the philosophy of social justice. And when they explain what it means, they say it's about, patriarchy and the wage gap and all this sort of thing. So to put that in as a requirement to be a teacher, it's just beyond the pale. There should be outcry, but...
Well, it's been always thus. Centuries ago, when I was in teaching for a short time, I was practically the only one in the staff room that had any centrist views, let's say. Everybody else was reading the Guardian newspaper, and I felt quite ostracized, even pulled out the Beano on one occasion as being a little more truthful. I mean, it's been going on for decades, and it's not fair on the kids. I repeat, they come out brainwashed, and they come out also extremely bitter against other people with other views. And that makes me think, well, why are they bitter? You don't get that from the other side.
No, there's always the hope that there's a natural rebelliousness in kids. And the more forcefully this is rammed down their throats, the more of them are going to say, oh, I've had enough of this. And we've got evidence of that. We have school kids getting in touch with us, high school kids, saying, oh, for goodness sake, listen to what's going on in our school. We're really fed up with it. So that's been quite helpful. I mean, for example, just one story. My pupils feel they're pressurized into wearing own clothes to raise money for LGBT Youth Scotland. And if they don't do it, then they stand out like a sore thumb. And the teachers are saying, oh, we know why you're not doing it. So we've had that sort of thing. But the whole indoctrination thing, the way it works in Scotland is that the government and the education, the schools, they're very big on listening to the young people. So they basically tell the young people what to think. And so they basically indoctrinate them in all the right issues. Then they say to them, what issues are important to you? And they hear exactly the same things reflected back to them, which they then take as evidence that they should carry on going in the same direction. And it just goes round and round in circles. There's something in Scotland. There's a Scottish Children's Parliament and there's a Scottish Youth Parliament. The Scottish Children's Parliament is primary school kids. And it's appalling to watch. So they've got these primary school kids and they're saying, what's important to you? And they're saying things like, we want to stop the sale of alcohol in supermarkets. Or we want the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child to be embedded in Scottish law. I mean, there's no way primary school kids are actually saying these things themselves. No. So they get these poor kids, again, tell them what to say, and then stick them in this sort of fake parliament and then record it and say, oh, we're listening to the voices of children. I mean, in a sense, it's laughable, but it's worse than that. It's sinister.
Well, yes. I mean, is it called Greta-itis at the extreme? And mentioning her name, what's your view on this matter? Are we all doomed in 11 years?
Well, just on the subject of Greta, I think she's an example of the cult of youth that we're among. And again, it seems to be that these particular campaigning groups have got such a grip on the media that the person they'll put forward, because obviously she's not reached prominence through any sort of personal qualities. It's just been a media decision that she will be a good person to put at the front. So I think in the future, I wouldn't be surprised in the future if she's not saying, I really resent or regret the way I was used in this campaigning. But in terms of climate change, my view is that basically I think I can't be convinced of the danger because I think the climate system is so complex. And I think the scientific capacity to predict a system that's so complex is basically not there. So I don't dismiss it at all. I don't object to steps being taken in order to reduce carbon emissions because of climate change. But on the other hand, I don't think anyone could convince me that they've got such a grip on that complex system that they can actually predict what's going to happen. So I'd say I'm fairly neutral about it. I mean, in Scotland, a load of school kids went and protested outside the Parliament, skipping school. And in response to that, Nicola Sturgeon declared a climate emergency. mean, that doesn't seem like the most rational basis to be setting your government policy to me.
What would you do about the people, the kids that pull down statues?
I think any criminal activity has got to be stamped out. I think that should be done pretty rigorously. And I think the police are probably, well, I think they have taken a very softly approach. But this is what always happens. Remember the riots in 2011? There's someone killed by someone was killed by the police one day. There were riots all over. And initially the police were very, very indulgent. And it spread and spread till eventually they had to toughen up a bit and get a grip on it. So then the same's happened here. The police have been standing off and allowing things to happen. I mean, that image of the black youth trying to set fire to the flag on the cenotaph. I mean, to put it mildly, that's not positive for race relations in Britain. And not particularly because he's black, because he's there under like a Black Lives Matter banner. I mean, that is really, that's about as destructive as you can get of community relations. The statue thing in Scotland, I mean, there's a big column at the end of George Street. I don't know if you know Edinburgh. A big column with a chap called Henry Dundas on the top. I mean, basically, no one really knows who he is. It's just a decoration. But people have done some research and found out about him. And he was in Parliament at the time when slavery was abolished. And when the bill was being put together, he argued for a clause to be put in it saying it should be a gradual process. So the Black Lives Matter people are saying, oh, look, you see, he made it gradual. He made it last for longer. We need to pull him down. But other people say, no, he wanted that in because he thought that would actually result in the bill getting passed instead of being defeated. But at the end of the day, I sort of can't be bothered looking into it because don't really mind. But any sort of nuance like that goes out the window. The other one in Glasgow, there's a statue of Robert Peel, founder of the police force, that was vandalised. I mean, what's that all about? So, yeah, I've got no time for vandalism and wanton destruction like that.
My goodness me, yes. Time has left us very quickly today, Richard. Thank you. I was hoping for a political message from you, and you being a normal politician, but you're not. You've actually answered my question straight without equivocation.
I'm going on a training course for politicians soon, so I'll hopefully do better in the future.
Don't you dare. Thank you, Richard.
Right, thanks for having me.